Welcome, everybody. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you are joining Women and Work Culture. This live stream is really all about helping women rise at work. And today we're talking about credibility, how to kind of build this quality and be even more strategic about how you do it. I have admired and followed our guest today for so long, Dorie Clark. We're so happy to have you. And you're really, I think, the perfect person to be bringing this topic today to life. A big welcome to you, Dorie. Thank you for being here.
Selena, thanks. So great to get to spend time with you.
Yeah, and a big welcome to our community. We're so excited each week to get to learn from you and with you. And already I'm seeing folks from Calgary. Nelia, welcome. Anissa from Tampa Bay, Michelle in the Philly suburbs. Let us know where in the world you're joining from. Jessica in Austin, hope you're doing well and staying safe there. Dorie, you have such a cool ice cream sundae of experiences you bring to your work. I want to tell people a little bit about you before we dive into questions. Dorie Clark has been named one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world by Thinkers 50. If you don't know that recognition, that is like the Oscars of the business world. So really huge. She is a keynote speaker and teaches some of the brightest minds in business at Duke University. She's the author of books like Entrepreneurial You, Reinventing You, and Stand Out. And she writes about those topics for Harvard Business Review. Prior to that, check this out, Dorie was a presidential campaign spokeswoman. Like, talk about street cred, right? That is awesome. So glad to have you. As we go, friends, send us your questions for Dorie about how to level up credibility in your work and in your career. So Dorie, we'd love to start at the beginning, and we love your kitty cat, Philip, behind, who's...
Thank you. He loves to make guest appearances. Feel free to, if you have questions for Philip, he'll take them.
I love it. Okay. Well, will you tell us, what gets you fired up about leadership development? What's some of your story that brought you into this field?
So what got me here, Selena, thank you for asking, is it was not for sure a strategic long-range vision. I originally thought I was going to be an academic, and after I finished my master's degree, I applied for doctoral programs, and I didn't get into any of them. So I had to come up with a different plan for myself. And I kept trying, different careers, and to a certain extent, hitting brick walls. I was a newspaper reporter and got laid off, and I was, as you mentioned, a spokesperson on a presidential campaign that did not succeed. And so I needed to figure something out. But eventually, 15 years ago now, I started my own business, because what I realized was that entrepreneurship would be a fantastic way for me to be able to take all the different pieces, all the different skills that I had learned about writing and sharing ideas and communicating more effectively in a crowded marketplace, and be able to do it in a way that I had a little bit more control over my future and hopefully be able to help more people.
Well, that's exactly what you have done. I love that you've lived reinvention, right? You've lived this and integrated these different pieces into this career you've made. Well, let's dive into credibility specifically. I know lots of definitions out there for it, right? But we all know it when we see it. We know it when we see it. MIT talks about it as competence and trustworthiness, but I'm really curious what you think about it. How do you define credible leadership?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, credibility is about conveying to, let me start with some interesting research that has really shaped my thinking about this. So a facet of credibility is the concept of executive presence. And I like digging into this because executive presence for so long was something that nobody had ever quantified. It really was this, well, you know it when you see it. And, that's great if you happen to have it, but it becomes problematic if you don't have it. And you're like, well, how do I get it?
Right.
And, if nobody can tell you, then you're sort of stuck. So there's a think tank called the Center for Talent Innovation that really broke down the question, what is this executive presence? And they did surveys to try to get at what people were really talking about, what they really meant. And ultimately, there were three key components that they identified. A small part of it was appearance. Are you presenting yourself professionally? A larger piece of it was your communication skills and whether you could actually speak forcefully and effectively, which is certainly something that we all want in our leaders. But the third part, which was the largest, and I think is quite interesting, is a term that they use the term gravitas. And it basically means, are you someone who in a moment of crisis is the kind of person that people feel good turning to? And I think the more we can cultivate that really is sort of the decisive, definitive thing. When we have credibility, when we have executive presence, we are the kind of person that when the chips are down, everybody else says, well, what does she think?
I love that as a measure. I don't think I've heard that before. Like, do people want to go to you and consult you or have you weigh in? That's a great writing definition for us today. We have a question from Anissa asking, do you think credibility is more important to demonstrate during crisis times, or that it's just as important during calm, ordinary times?
So obviously credibility is a great thing to have at all points, right? I mean, who wouldn't want it? I do think it's more important during a crisis because everything is heightened during a crisis, right? And so both strengths and weaknesses are magnified during that time. It's kind of a time of amplification. And so during the time when things are negative, you either can really mark yourself as a great leader. And when we think about, for instance, in American history, the people that most typically are named as our greatest presidents, they're usually wartime presidents, right? Because they had the moment to shine, when everything could have been terrible, Abraham Lincoln united the nation or whatever it was. And so, as Warren Buffett likes to say, when the tide goes out, that's when you can see who's been swimming naked. So
Right. That's great.
you can cover up a lot of sins when there's a great economy and everything's fine. But when things get difficult, as they certainly have been over the last year, that is when it becomes so much more critical to be able to have legitimate credibility and legitimate skills that you can offer to people.
Yeah, that's so true. I think we can all relate to that after this year. There's, sometimes you want more reassurance in your leaders, a different kind of solid presence, there are certain bodies or organizations or people who just ooze confidence. I wonder if you've observed or witnessed, certain people, maybe a particular person who really is good at conveying this in your mind.
Yeah, in terms of being able to convey confidence, it's a great question. I mean, these days for so many of us, we don't necessarily, in our media landscape, it's become so fragmented. There's not necessarily even the same people that we know as reference points, right? But I think that in general, I mean, just to take an example that literally everyone would know, we think about somebody like a Barack Obama, for instance, right? He's a perfect example of the kind of cool and understated confidence. It's not flashy. It's not performative. It is not hot, quote unquote, where it's, let me shove it down your throat that I know it and this and this and this. It's ultimately this kind of understated confidence of course I know it, and let me explain, let me tell you. And I think that is certainly a very powerful mode and model. Not everyone has to have that same mode. Some people are kind of inherently turned up a little bit more emotionally, and they're going to be a little more fiery, and that's a legitimate form of confidence. But there is a spectrum of ways in which one can manifest one's belief in oneself and their ideas.
Yeah, and I think about him and I think about consistency, right? Like this steady drumbeat of behavior and the way he shows up. It's not highly unpredictable. It's you kind of know what's coming, and I think that's a piece of this here. Some of the research out there shows that men may be more likely to be pegged with this word credibility. I know one study found women specifically felt that way, that men were more likely to earn that tag. Do you have any advice for that emerging leader, an emerging female leader who wants to show this quality more?
Yeah. So when it comes to credibility, one of the things that I talk about, I've spent a lot of time, Selena, over the past decade, really studying the question of what it takes to become a recognized expert, whether it's inside your company or inside your industry. And what I have come to understand is there are three key components that we need to be mindful of with this. And very briefly, what they are is what I call content creation, which basically means sharing your ideas. Now, there's not one way that's better than others to do this. You could write articles, you could give speeches at conferences or be on panels, you could do lunch and learns for your colleagues, whatever it is, but somehow you have to share your ideas so people know what your ideas are. Number two is building a strong network, so you actually have people who support you and can help amplify your ideas. And then the last part, which I want to focus on, is a concept that comes out of the world of psychology, and it's known as social proof. And social proof really is, in many ways, just kind of another way of talking about credibility. But basically, what it refers to is like, look, this is a crowded world. This is a noisy world. Why should someone who does not already know you, is not already familiar with you, why should they pay attention to you? How do we capture their attention and their mind share so that they understand that it is worth it for them to take the time? There's like 100 people they could be looking at. Why are they listening to you? And one of the fastest ways to obtain social proof is essentially to find ways to ally yourself with brands that people already trust and recognize. This is really the key part here, because it takes a long time for you to build trust and credibility. So if you can piggyback on things that people already know, it's really valuable. So for instance, oh, well, she must be good because she used to work at Google. Or, oh, she must be good because she's on the board of this professional association and they wouldn't let her on if she was a crackpot. Or, she must be good because she wrote that op-ed for the local business journal. Or, oh, I heard her on a panel at that conference I go to every year. If you are pre-vetted by institutions or people that are already trusted by your target audience, that helps you essentially create a shortcut to credibility.
Yeah, these are such good practical tips. And I think a great prompt for everyone here who's joining us. What is that content you're creating? How are you letting your network know about it? And how are you cultivating the social proof? This is awesome and really kind of actionable and practical things we can do. We've talked about this at times being hard to define, but one thing we know is it can be tricky to build credibility and kind of easy to lose it. If we make a faceplant or a mistake, what are some steps we could go about to kind of keep our credibility?
Sure. Well, it obviously depends on what the exact type of it is, how to prepare for it. But just in general, I would say that one of the counterintuitive pieces of advice about this, it is human nature. Now, we're assuming that this is maybe an issue between you and an individual coworker rather than kind of a broader, like social media disaster or something. Right. But if there's an issue with you and another person, the human tendency is to kind of stay away from that person because you're just like, oh no, I can't face them. It's terrible. Or, you don't want to relitigate it. You don't want to be reminded of the conflict. So you just kind of keep your distance. That is very natural and understandable, but it turns out, unfortunately, the wrong move because, if we peel it back, right, it kind of makes sense. If the only exposure they have to you or the most recent exposure they have to you is whatever this conflict or this mistake or this problem is, that is going to be the thing that stays in their mind and gets reinforced. Oh, she's the woman that did blah, blah, blah. And you're not giving them any new data to update and reevaluate their impression of you. So ironically, what you need to do, unfortunately, is you actually need to lean into that relationship and spend more time with them so that they can actually see, oh, well, she's not just the person that did this thing. She also actually did a pretty good job with this other thing. Or, oh, she was really late, that time, but, oh, I guess she's actually been kind of early all the other times. Mm-hmm. And so you're able to improve the relationship through proximity, which is not necessarily fun, but it is what is effective.
Yeah, and I think that's such smart advice, because part of that is a mindset thing, isn't it? It's saying to yourself, maybe this mistake doesn't need to be the final word on this, yes, my reputation, right? It's not giving it that much power. It's writing a different ending. So I love that. And Jessica's appreciating all your great nuggets and insights as well. And so is another LinkedIn user who's loving all of your book, Dorie. I think so many people do. One of the questions I have for you is around don't do. A don't do. We all love some cautionary advice and tales, right? They help us learn sometimes as much as the to-dos. Do you have a don't do for us when it comes to credibility?
Sure. Yeah. When it comes to credibility, I think that one mistake that I see from a lot of folks is actually, I work with private coaching clients, and many times people have put a lot of time and effort into, for instance, writing articles or things like that, trying to get their ideas out there. But what they've been doing is putting a lot of effort into their own platforms, and that is wonderful. But the problem there is that for the people who already know you, they get exposed to it and they say, oh, she's fantastic, she's so smart. But if you are not giving new people a way to discover you, then that content is going to remain buried and dormant and latent because the vast majority of people are just not going to happen to stumble upon your blog. So you really need to be smart about having a kind of 1-2 punch of like, okay, yes, sure, have a place where your content is domiciled so that people can find it, but give people a bridge so that they can discover it. So I'm a big fan of encouraging people, if you are bothering to create content or to, share your ideas in whatever way, don't just speak to the audience you already know. Make sure you are continuing to find a way to introduce yourself to audiences that are not already familiar with your work. Otherwise, you'll kind of stay a best kept secret for a long time.
Right. So don't keep it in the family, right? Or it kind of fulfills itself. You can get a little smothered in that tiny world. Take advantage of those weaker ties, not just the strong ties. I think that's great. Send us your questions for Dorie around credibility. We already love what we're seeing, but we'd love to see even more. We have a great question from Anissa, who is zeroing in on a particular part of that we can all relate to, which is being new. What about when you're new and you don't really have any street cred yet? How do you get people to listen to you and take you seriously?
Yes, always a good question, Anissa. So there's a few levers that we can think of as being at our disposal, right? So first of all, depending how new you are, if you really are super new, it's actually usually a better idea to get the lay of the land politically first before putting too much out there, right? It's useful to build relationships. I mean, this is why, for instance, like, when Hillary Clinton first ran for Senate, and people thought, oh, you're a carpetbagger, what are you doing here? She made a point, which Philip endorses, of specifically going on a listening tour, because she wanted to create, number one, she wanted to get herself better informed, so she didn't make any terrible faux pas. But she also wanted to kind of get the buy-in of the people who were, who were the folks who might shoot her down otherwise. Because if they actually felt like, oh, I met her, she's nice, I feel heard, then they're less likely to torpedo her. So actually starting with a listening tour, in whatever form, not a bad idea. The other element that's crucial here is that if we think about levers of credibility, it's not really credibility per se, but stepping back, what we want, you said, how do you get people to take you seriously, to listen to your ideas? This is about influence, right? And so I refer to the work of the great Robert Cialdini, the author of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. It's on my mind because I was actually just fortunate enough. He has a new edition coming out, and he just shared it with me because I'm going to be doing an endorsement quote for it. And so I'm in the process of rereading it and orienting myself to his great ideas. But one of the points that he makes is that at a really simple level, one of the best ways to influence people is just for them to like you. And so actually taking the time to build relationships early on, even if you don't have any credibility, as long as they like you, as long as they think you're nice, they are far more likely than not to be willing to at least listen, maybe to do something because of that positive bond. So I'd say that is a key thing. We can think about other levels and layers as well. Robert Cialdini talks about reciprocity and the importance of that in terms of persuasion. So it is never a bad idea, as you're establishing yourself in a company, to be looking for ways to be helpful, looking for ways to do favors for people, because later on, again, it will predispose them to receive your ideas more favorably. It doesn't guarantee a positive outcome, but it often will at least guarantee that your idea gets heard.
Right. And I think Phillips really mastered the likability thing early on in his career. But I love that. What a great prompt, once again, for all of us to be thinking about. Have you really scanned the culture and the environment around you? If you're that new person, or you're in a new situation, or new on a committee or team, have you thought about the basic human rapport and likability factor? And then what about being helpful, raising your hand, right? Letting people know you're there. We have a really good question from Nelia. Do you have any thoughts about credibility, specifically in a multicultural environment?
Yeah, such a good point. So one of the things that I always like to advise people to think about is just making sure, because sometimes it's easy to forget, that we are starting with the end goal and then kind of working backwards from there, right? So if we were creating an influence strategy in a particular environment, let's say a multicultural one, and I actually wrote an article that might be of interest to folks that involves certain aspects of this. It came out a while ago from Harvard Business Review, but if you Google a campaign plan for your career and Dorie Clark and Harvard Business Review, you should be able to find that free article. But basically what you would want to do is to create a bespoke influence strategy. So look at all the people that you're trying to get to be on board with your idea, and literally, sort of think through the process. This is an idea that is used frequently in the world of politics, which is a world I come out of, called power mapping. And so you want to say, well, okay, what are the levers that influence them? What are the issues that they care about? Who is whispering in their ear? Who do they listen to? And what is the strength of your relationship with that person? Because it's true, when it comes to credibility, if I could tell someone in, a small foreign country, oh, hey, I do a weekly interview show for Newsweek. And that might be impressive to an American that knows what Newsweek is. But if you're in Papua New Guinea, they'd be like, what's Newsweek? What's a Newsweek? And, They don't care. That is not going to be helpful in terms of my credibility if you've never heard of that publication. So we have to really do a sort of deep dive analysis and say, okay, for this individual, what's credible to them? Who do they respect? Who do they listen to? And what are those markers? Maybe it's that, credibility in their mind is, oh, well, my best friend is the director of finance, and so I like anyone that he likes. Okay, well, how do we make friends with that person? Maybe credibility is, I don't take anyone seriously unless they demonstrate a mastery of Ruby on Rails programming. Okay, well, geez, I guess I better, take some classes in that so I can learn how to do it. But it's really thinking through on an individual by individual basis, what is going to move them and how can I capture that to make my pitch more effective?
Love it. Think about the audience, right? What's the conversation in their mind? Speak to the conversation in their head. We have a question that Michelle sent from somebody who's listening in the car. And it's this: should I trend toward totally transparent communication, or is there a danger of oversharing? What do you think about that when it comes to credibility?
Yes, it's such a good valuable discussion, right? Because I think sometimes people kind of almost willfully create straw men in a conversation like this, right? Like, in general, is transparency good? Yes, of course it is. Like, we all can appreciate, like, don't hide things. Don't be secretive. Like, who's like, oh yeah, I'd like a secretive colleague.
Right.
Like, that doesn't seem good. So is transparency good in general? Yes, of course. The question is, how precisely does it play out? What does that process look like? And I think that sometimes, for the sake almost of rhetorical arguments, people will say, well, does transparency mean me saying, gosh, Selena, I just don't really like you that much, which is not true. But by way of example, like, okay, no, that's just dumb. That's just, I don't think anyone would really argue for that, or that that's beneficial. Similarly, people will take, the sort of extreme example of transparency about, how was your day, Dorie? Oh, well, let me tell you about my complicated health issue and how it manifests. Like, no, nobody wants to hear that either. And realistically, unless someone really has social relation problems, they're not going to do that either. So I think the extreme examples that get cited, it's almost a rhetorical device. I would say that in general, yes, most people, most workers would say, yes, I would like a more transparent work environment. And, it's for the most logical of reasons, right? I would like it to be more transparent because I don't understand how decisions are made around here. Or I don't really know what the strategy is because nobody's telling us, or maybe they're telling us conflicting things. And, those are real problems in the workplace. And if we actually can have more communication and more transparency, then that is all to the good.
I think so too. I think so many people are craving transparency and real talk, right? Especially at a time like we've been through, having a year like no other. Well, Dorie, this has been such a cool walk through credibility. We have a tradition here of asking our expert guests for a parting truth bomb. Is there something, when it comes to getting this credibility thing right, that you really want to stick in our minds?
I love it, Selena. Thank you so much. I will answer it in two ways. The first one is, I will just mention, if people really want to take a deep dive, I created something called the Standout Self-Assessment, which is a 142 question self-assessment to walk you through step by step the process of really understanding how you can develop credibility and identify your niche so that you can stand out in the marketplace. And folks can get it for free at dorieclark.com/join, JOIN. So that's the first answer. The second answer, in terms of how do we best establish credibility, is to just let people know that ultimately, I think sometimes people are held back or hold themselves back from really going for it and pursuing it because they feel like, oh, this is going to be some long, exhausting thing. I don't have time. But the subject of my new book, The Long Game, is really about how small and strategic actions taken over time can have a compounding effect. And I think it's true in the stock market, and it's also true in our careers. And so if you can devote even 1 hour, a half hour per week to finding ways to just level up your credibility, write that LinkedIn article, or reach out and raise your hand and say, you know what, sure, I will be the membership chair of the professional organization. By doing that and devoting even an hour a week to it, you are going to be making demonstrable gains that you probably can't see in 6 months or 12 months, but you can definitely see in 5 years. And it makes a huge difference.
I love it. We all needed that. Thank you, Dorie, for the ways, you're helping people really think big about their impact and their careers, how to reinvent themselves, and how to build this thing called credibility. We all need your message and your encouragement so much. So in the show notes, you're going to see the exact link Dorie mentioned. So you can get that Reinventing You self-assessment. You can also follow Dorie on LinkedIn, which I highly recommend you do if you're not, and learn about the incredible things she's doing at her website. I hope you'll stay in touch with me too. I have a brand new newsletter on LinkedIn that's 8,500 people strong, called Quick Confidence. And follow me here on LinkedIn as well. Dorie, I want to thank you again. I want to thank you, everyone in our community. Remember, credibility is your currency, and it's something we can build with consistency. Stay well, everybody, and lead on.